Hello, welcome to this episode of a Creative Approach podcast. I'm your host, Karen Poirier-Brody. My guest today is Tracey Clark, an author, photographer, teacher, speaker, consultant, and mom. She's also a community builder. Tracey inspires with her passion for taking meaningful photos of the everyday. I first met Tracey at a Shutter Sisters photography retreat several years ago. I took a number of her classes online. Later, I met her again at a retreat called Play, created by Stacey Julian, a prior guest at a Creative Approach podcast. Tracey and her sister are lovers of Disney, and Disneyland was part of the fun retreat in Anaheim. Visiting Disneyland with Tracey as a guide is a favorite memory. Speaking of creating memories, I've had some memorable opportunities to visit Squaw Valley and ski. I must admit it's not been easy, but it's worth the pain. I do get some seasonal affective disorder type symptoms, and the time outdoors is effective at addressing that. My partner noticed my mood change immediately on my first trip to the snow country last year. I'm not a lover of the cold, and the first day of winter was tough, a cold, windy, short day. Still, it was good. It's odd how I felt like I was being a bit of a wuss by just a few trips on an easy green run, but my body felt like it worked out plenty. Maybe I'll feel up to something steeper later in the season. It's breathtakingly beautiful on top of the mountain and very soul restorative. I posted a photo of the view of the mountains and incredible blue Lake Tahoe on the Creative Approach podcast Facebook group page. One of my plans for the coming year is to focus more on intentional photography and telling my story. One more reason I'm delighted to welcome one of my photography teachers to the show. I want to remind you to visit the show notes at www.acreativeapproachpodcast.com to find more information about the shows and web links to my guests. I know you'll enjoy my conversation with Tracey Clark. Let's learn her story and her thoughts on her creative approach. I know you'll enjoy my conversation with Tracey Clark. Let's learn her story and her thoughts on a creative approach. Hello, and welcome to a Creative Approach podcast. I'm so happy to have Tracey Clark here today to talk with me and with you. And welcome, Tracey.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
Yes. And what I usually start with is talking a little bit about what it is you do in your career. Now, you're a photographer, but you're so much more. And you've done a lot.
I do a little of everything, yes.
Yeah, well, but you've written things, you've started, Shutter Sisters, I'm sure we have to get to that. Yeah. But maybe you could just start in here and maybe fill us in a little bit about what you're doing right this minute.
Okay, great. So I think that I go to photographer first and foremost because that's what I've done the longest. I used to do that in a professional capacity by way of events and portraits and things. And then slowly that evolved. I have kept that up in different ways. So I still shoot all the time, mostly now for different articles and classes that I teach. So I do a lot of writing. So I consider myself a photographer, a writer, doing a lot of stuff for web and blog and social media, and then also books. I have 4 books. 2 early on I wrote that are more for expectant mothers and first year of having a baby, and those are more like journal books. And then I co-authored the Shutter Sisters book with the contributors of Shutter Sisters, and then I have a book called Elevate the Everyday that I wrote about motherhood and shooting and capturing those daily moments of motherhood. And now I've got older kids, so it's a completely different part of the journey. But so I'm doing that and still teaching some online classes here and there. So I kind of do a little bit of everything, go where the wind takes me. where the projects come up when something pans out. I have a little bit of a spaghetti at the wall approach, and whatever sticks, I kind of point my compass that way. So.
Well, I like to mention a few times where people can find our guests. And so for our listener, if you would like to give me maybe some places where people could find you would be helpful.
Yeah, super. So TraceyClark.com is TraceyClark.com. And that's kind of, that's the main place you can find me, which is just kind of gives you an overview of what I'm doing and what I've done. I have a blog that I update, not as often as I used to, but once here and again. And then also it kind of gives you all my social media places from there. Everything's pretty much Tracey Clark. And then, like you said, Shutter Sisters is active on Instagram right now, not so much on the web. So you can find Shutter Sisters on Instagram. And that's pretty much the best way to find me, I think, is just through my website. And, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff too. So I love, seeing everybody there.
Yeah, and I first learned about you through big picture classes, I think, where you taught a class. Yep. And then I went over to the Shutter Sisters blog, and I went to, a Shutter Sisters event. That was the one at the Ace Hotel, cool place in Palm Springs.
Yeah, that was fun.
It was fun. And and your teaching style, I think you were maybe working on Elevate the Everyday at that point, or?
Yeah, I probably was. I had a wonderful experience with big picture classes. Since then, which was a number of years ago, they've been acquired by another company, so they've changed quite a bit. But when I was back with the big picture classes early on, I had the opportunity to I got really prolific over there because they had such an incredible administration team that could do all the back end things and all the promotion and the sales and all of the stuff that's harder for me to do. And I think harder for most creatives to do. So it was actually like a dream come true because I don't think I've ever been as prolific as I was when I was in that partnership. And I wrote, I think 8 classes, put on 8 or something. Yeah, a lot.
Because I took a lot of them.
Yeah. And it was so fun for me and I feel like it's really relevant too, to people who are creatives looking to, find a way to make it a career, is finding partners that can do some of the things that are harder for you or that aren't as enjoyable for you. That was literally probably the most prolific I've ever been, is when I was with Big Picture. And since then I've tried different things. It's just hard to do everything. So it's fun to find someone who can help you do the parts that they find easy and not necessarily easy, but they're really good at. And so that worked really well. But I have met a lot of incredible people through Big Picture, and the classes that I teach are a lot less how-to and a lot more creativity inspired. Like, I call them photocentric creativity classes because they are photography in the sense that you use photography as a tool in the class and how I teach, but I'm not always teaching, or hardly ever teaching, the really nitty gritty of how to use your camera. But it's more, I do a lot of my teaching in more how to see and how to capture what it is that you see and what means a lot to you. So it's a little bit of a different style than a lot of photography classes, but it's what I love the most. So it's what I feel like I'm best at.
And very good at it. I think you let us see, possibilities of photographing. Well, as you said, elevate the everyday, simple little things. Mm-hmm. I remember, the coffee cup.
Mm-hmm. I love my coffee cups. Yeah, yes. And I think, for me, what's really exciting is I continue to hear people say things like, wow, that was really transformative. And I'm thinking, wow, it really only takes the simplest stuff to open our eyes to something new. And I always feel like it's exciting when I can say to someone, once you start seeing this magic, once you start really noticing all the little things around you that are happening truly in your everyday life, you don't ever look at it the same again. So it actually, for as simple as it seems, it really is transformative. And I love talking about it. I talk about it all the time to everyone, whether people are in my classes or not. I can't help it. It's like part of who I am. And it's exciting for me, not only to see the world that way, because I'm still excited when in the way I can see that kind of thing in every day. It's really the only thing that kind of gets me through, right? So it's exciting for me to share that with people.
Yeah, that's so true. And there are just simple ways of seeing how the light plays and how an object, just by taking pictures of it from different angles and different times of day, and can really give you some sense of something that's meaningful to you.
Right. And that's the key, meaningful to you. I think that's the part that makes it so fun is, I can share the things that I see, but then when someone else sees them in a way that it means something to them, that's what changes everyone's lives, whatever is meaningful to us. And I think using photography for that tool is so much fun. I mean, I was drawn to photography early on because of, I consider it like an instant gratification creative tool. It's not like, you don't have to get messy. You don't have to get out a whole bunch of your stuff. You don't even really have to carve out time for it like you do with a lot of other creative mediums like painting or, that comes off the top of my head. And that's what I think I found early on the most exciting, is that it was so accessible. And I mean, that was 25 years ago. And now here we are, talk about accessible. Now you really have it at your fingertips with your phone, which is a completely different world from when I started, which was with, the big manual camera and the film and all that. I mean, now the accessibility of a creative tool, it's never been like this. So it's really, really exciting, and it makes everyday creativity easy for everyone.
Yeah. Now, do you take a lot of your photos now on your phone, or do you kind of mix it up?
I take the majority of pictures now on my phone, unless I'm working on a specific, unless I'm working for a client or I'm working on a specific project that I know that I'm going to want some DSLR pictures, or like if I'm, teaching a class and I want to show an example of something, if something needs to be published, I'm usually using my DSLR. But as far as like my Instagram is all iPhone, the things that kind of spark my interest every day that I see out and about, I use my iPhone for all the time.
Well, certainly handy, and the cameras are so much better now on our phones. It's
I know you can
incredible.
you can see the difference. It's like night and day, just from like early iPhone days. I think our future generations will look back and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, there was the iPhone 4," and I think you can tell even like with Instagram. Filters, it's like, oh, that was the early days of Instagram, right? Remember that filter? Like it's already like changing so much, but they really are. The cameras are getting so much better.
Yeah, that makes photography less intimidating, because I think it's fun to know how to use a DSLR, but it's big, it's expensive. There's
it can be prohibitive for sure. And it can, like you said, really intimidating. With all the different ways you can learn about them online now, it helps that you can have, you have access to things to help you with your DSLR. And I would never steer people away from that, because it's just it's a different tool. It's like a different paintbrush. So I would say anything that is of interest to you, pursue it for sure. And also, I mean, the bottom line is I can literally defend the iPhone for days, but when it really comes down to it, there are things that you can capture with a DSLR that you could never capture with an iPhone. I mean, that's just the reality of how it is, at least from my experience. And I mean, I feel like I've mastered my iPhone pretty well, but sometimes I'm just like, oh yeah, I got to take it to the next camera. And then when I do, I'm always like, oh, that's so fun and wonderful. So I like them both.
Yeah. And then, of course, it depends how much you want to do things as far as post-processing, too. I mean, there's a certain amount with filters, but really, if you have a raw file, you can manipulate it a lot in technical things like Adobe Photoshop and things.
It's so true.
And then, so you said about getting into photography 20-something years ago, but when did you first pick up a camera? Were you a kid, or did that happen later in life?
It's funny. I was a kid when I first picked up a camera, but it was more for, really point and shoot things. Like I didn't even really remember that until I've had friends from back in high school and things say, oh, remember that disc camera, the one with the negatives that were like literally like 2 millimeters big, which I don't know who thought of that, but it's the craziest thing. But like little point and shoot cameras and whatever the next little fun camera was, I guess I used them a lot. I mean, I didn't realize it or remember because I don't think I considered it necessarily a creative passion then, as much as it was just a documentation tool, like, just shooting pictures of friends and things out and about. And, I have younger siblings. They were little and they were fun to, take pictures of. But I really didn't really use a bigger, a DSLR or a SLR at the time until college. And I just took a photo 101 class and learned some stuff there and thought it was really cool and really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And then I took a photo class that also had printmaking involved, which I was the most excited in college as an art major in printmaking. And when I took a class that included printmaking and photography, so it was 2 processes in one, that's when photography really started to interest me. And I just happened to have a really great teacher for that class, thank goodness. And things really, really fell into place for me. And I really understood that was the medium I wanted to use. And then I graduated. I mean, I was really close to graduation, so I didn't want to add on any more time to my to get my degree. So I didn't follow up with anything specific like photography or printmaking. I just graduated and I was waiting tables, and then I worked in a photo lab because it was across the street from the restaurant I worked at. And then it all kind of started falling into place. I got a job with a photographer who used to come into the photo lab, and I didn't have really any true photography work to show him, but I was just struck up a conversation with him because he was shooting black and whites back before people started shooting black and white again. And he was like, oh, you come to the studio. And the next thing I know, I was working full time for him. And it was one of those weird, be at the right place, be at the right time, I was open to it. And then I got a job with him and I worked for him for 12 years. And then I just took off from there. And ever since then, it's just been, one thing after another and kind of with a real base in the photography part of it, for sure.
So you had studied art in college then? Yeah.
Which I feel like is really done me such a huge favor. Rather than studying photography, studying art in general gave me a really well-rounded way of seeing things and appreciating art and composition, which is really exciting to me. The compositional part of photography, which I feel like is, as important, if not more important than the technical part of it. I mean, you can learn how to use a camera. It's a little bit of a science. It's not so much an intuition, but learning how to see and compose a picture is a completely different part of photography that I feel like is essential.
Yeah, I enjoyed the class you taught on that. That was one of the ones I remember well.
Great.
But as far as art, I mean, what you had studied that, you didn't really have photography in mind. What were you thinking you were going to do with this degree?
I didn't think I was going to be able to be a fine artist because I didn't really have one thing that I was really passionate about. I wanted to do graphic design, which I still really love, but it was one of those things like, oh, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to try so hard to get into an impacted program? And I just wasn't that driven. That's just, school is not super exciting or never was super exciting for me. I was more about like recess. So I was like, getting a degree for me was like a really big deal. Not that I ever questioned that I would, but I didn't really have any desire to continue my education past getting the degree. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I just kept thinking, I'm going to do something creative. And I had teachers who taught me that. I mean, I had a sculpture teacher who was like, you can do sculpture in a million ways in your professional life. And he would have these people come in and share with us their stories. And there was some just outlandish stuff you'd never think would be someone who majored in sculpture. So I was really lucky. I had 3 male teachers all around the same time who all taught me different things about living a creative life and finding a creative career that wasn't necessarily in a niche you could guess, but kind of just like more of an, like, throw out a wider net. And I think it really got me to believe that I could do it. So all my mantra was like, I will get a job and I will be creative in my job. I just didn't know what. So I think that kind of helped me, because I was really open to whatever kind of presented itself. Sometimes that's a bad thing, because I feel like I wish I had more of a vision to go towards, but that's just not how I do it. It's just not how I've ever done it. So I've always just kind of trusted that what comes on the path is the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that you used as an example a sculpture, because I think that's one of the points that you brought up was things like sculpting with light, using light in your photography to achieve your picture, your image that you're going for.
It really shapes it and brings it to life. And it's so funny because, I mean, I couldn't paint. I was a pretty good sculptor, I have to say. I did pretty good. I liked my work, but I feel like I was thinking of this the other day. I thought I should try to, now that I know how to see light, because I didn't back then. Now that I know how to see light, I should try something new. I should try painting or drawing and see if that, like, what that does. Now that I know what I'm looking at, it would be interesting. It's just something I've been thinking about lately. So maybe you'll see me painting sometime soon.
Well, that would be fun.
It would be fun.
And it probably would make a difference.
Yeah.
I have an interesting, very photorealistic oil painting in my house. Now, it's just a small little thing of a basket of strawberries, but I understand the woman who painted it has a background in photography. And I think, well, that's how she could capture just how the light in this plastic just looks right.
That is true. And I actually have a painter friend who said, well, a couple of them, like, oh, I'd love to paint some of your pictures sometime. And I think that you do need good photography that really does show the light in ways if you're the type of painter that paints from a picture. So I would imagine that would help. I mean, if you can take a picture and see all that light in there, I would imagine you could paint it too.
Yeah, and even if you're trying to draw from life, I mean, I like to set up a still life when I'm doing a drawing. I don't like painting that much, but drawing, and set it up and then take photographs. And of course, it makes a difference what time of day is how the light, but you can it really helps you look at the photograph, look at the scene. And then when you're doing it, those interesting reflections and where the light hits the object, it's very interesting, and it makes it more fun to draw.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I think my hang up in doing any kind of drawing or painting was always what my mind wanted it to, what my mind thought I should be drawing rather than what I actually see. Because that's what they say, that, you kind of interpret it in your mind. And so as you're drawing like a person, you're doing these things that you think a person looks like. But if you're looking at the photograph and you're looking at the pieces of it that aren't necessarily the person, but just the light, it completely changes it. And maybe that's part of the key when you're trying to paint something from a picture is it's not, if you just take your mind out of it and you just use your eyes and not your mind, I think you're in better shape.
Sometimes.
Your mind, it depends. Your mind can do all kinds of strange things. We have all these strange ideas of what things look like or what things are supposed to be shaped like and stuff.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
I always find that that's the thing I try and say to people about art. They say, well, I can't really draw or something. I'm going, well, you never really would have said that when you were a kid, and you just would have drawn it. And who's to say that your drawing is not the right true way of doing it? And probably if you ever really wanted to make money in art, you have to do it differently than other people.
Boy, that's for sure. Yeah, your own vision. I mean, no one can see it. Even in a photograph, which I love, you can see a million pictures of mugs, but rarely are they they're not the same picture twice, which I think is so exciting. And that's what I love about my classes is I get to see everyone's work, and everyone's work is different. And it's so inspiring to see the different ways people see things and different ideas. I mean, I'm inspired all the time by other people's work. because I think it's so fun and fascinating to see something, especially if you haven't seen it. That's the spark that gets me excited. When I see something I wouldn't have thought of, or I have never seen before, or I don't know how to do, I'm like, oh, like that's the kind of stuff that makes me really excited and inspired.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I liked about that kind of class that I took was, you'd have an assignment and then everybody would put that in and there would be a gallery of what everyone was trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. And that's a really exciting class when you're doing it online, because when you're just sitting there and watching a YouTube video and doing something on your own, you don't quite get the same insights.
Yeah, no, that is true. It's such a fine line too, because it kind of depends on where your headspace is. I know a lot of people get really hung up with seeing other people's work because of that horrible comparison, thing that we all have, where you're like, oh, they're so much better. They're so much better. That is the killer of all creativity. And I mean, I think we've all probably been there. It's a universal experience to have that kind of, where you have a moment and you just think, ugh, man, they're so great. And that picture is so great. I could never do that, or I'm not very good. And that's the worst killer of creativity, is that comparison thing. So there are some people I know that don't prefer to watch other people's work, and they don't want to go online. And especially in the world of, Pinterest perfect, that kind of world, and how we all, tend to think everyone else's life looks so great.
Yeah.
That can be it can just be debilitating and awful. I think balance is the key. If you can be inspired by it and not feel bad about it, that's the trick. And sometimes it just depends on where you're at, in your journey.
Right. Well, I think having a variety of ways of people learning, but that's a nice thing about small classes too, is that if you do it in person, you get a little bit of feedback and you work with people, but then there isn't quite so much to intimidate you. Yeah.
And I think, for me, like just, kind of touching on Shutter Sisters, when I thought about, back when Shutter Sisters was kind of a vision in my head, it was because I knew there wasn't a space for women to share online. It was, the internet was fairly new as far as being online and blogging. It was really new. And so I started a blog for a motherhood, a mom's website about photography. And when I started seeing how many people just wanted to talk up and share and show their pictures and talk about photography, that's when I started Shutter Sisters. Soon after that, I was like, oh, there's a thing here. We as women, as creatives, really want to share what it is that we're doing with each other, our families, and now our everyday life. And with Shutter Sisters, I was like, one of my most important parts was that I really wanted people to feel like it was safe to share and that it was encouraging. And I didn't want anybody to feel like they didn't belong, or they couldn't do it, or they were, comparing themselves to other people. Everything for me, I just wanted it to feel really warm, welcoming, inclusive, and not at all intimidating. And I feel like that was one of the great successes that I witnessed at Shutter Sisters, is that I felt like people really did just want to share, and it felt good. I felt like it was a space that felt safe.
Yeah, I think so. And the work that some people were doing was truly amazing, and do. I don't follow Instagram so much. It's probably my least used social media platform. When I do go over, I enjoy seeing what's going on there. But I think that's another place of seeing, well, there's a lot of people who are very, very good. And so I suppose for some people that might be intimidating, but it is inspiring to see what people are doing.
Yeah, it is. And it's just, there are so many new ways of doing things and new types, you kind of, I think art in general, but with photography, especially with the rise of photography, you're seeing things done differently and they kind of go through phases. You see a certain type of work, and then that kind of fades away, and then you see a new type of work. And for me, it's interesting to watch that happen. I mean, I've been observing that for a long time, so I've seen kind of the trends that kind of arise, and it's really amazing to me how many people are doing so much beautiful work. And I think it's the coolest part for me is with Shutter Sisters in particular, starting, back then, was that so many of the women that were really active were like not proclaimed photographers necessarily, but just enjoyed doing the creative part, enjoyed creating things with their camera. And, you know, sometimes that can be like apologetic. People are like, I'm not even a photographer and this isn't that great. But the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter what you want to consider yourself. If you're creating something with any medium, that's what it is you're doing. Whether you feel comfortable, like you can say you're a photographer or not, you know, that's your own journey. I always say, if you're shooting pictures, you're a photographer, you know, get over it. You know, like really just claim it, you know, just do it. Who cares? No one's judging you. You're just judging yourself, you know?
Yeah, well, I always say to people who record on Facebook, they're all digital scrapbookers because they're writing a story and taking a picture.
Right? It is true. It's the same exact thing. I'm like, oh, you're shooting a lot of pictures. Well, you can say it, you know, claim it if you want to claim it. You don't have to. There's no pressure. You don't have to do whatever.
Yeah, you don't have to make money at it.
Right. But it's nice not to have that pressure. You don't have to be a quote professional to be, you know, and you don't have to even put it into a category. You know, it is what it is. But I think it's nice to have the permission to do it because you love it. And, you know, I think the greatest thing is when you like what you're getting. You know, that's where we all strive to be at the point where we shoot a picture and we're excited by it and we want to share it and we like it. And it really doesn't matter if anyone likes it or not. It doesn't matter. I mean, we're kind of in this trap of looking for likes and hoping we get, you know, people noticing. But before all that started, way back before we could like people's stuff and could give that nod of approval, I mean, if you like it, you like it. And you should like it. You should love it. You should love what you're doing. That I think is the reason you keep going. Yeah. And if you don't love it, you don't have to love it either. I've had people say to me literally like, I am trying so hard to like photography and I just don't. And I'm like, why are you trying? Find something else. Like you don't. I am not going to be the one to tell you that you should really love photography.
Yeah, but maybe they feel the pressure that somebody wants them to document what's going on and
yeah, that could be.
Give them that, you know, information about themselves, and they're trying to do it in a way. Well, maybe they want to have the picture perfect life, you know.
Yeah.
I don't mind when.
Who knows what it is? Yeah, it is true. There's a lot of.
No, when you look back, you know, obviously there's things like you said you're really proud of, but I mean, when you reflect back on your early photography, I'm sure you'll find things there that you still love. Do you look at things sometimes and say, I have developed here, or oh my God, I forgot I used to do that.
I don't. I don't even think I've evolved. I swear. I think I'm capturing things differently. But I look back in my earliest work, Photography 101, and yeah, some of it's really kind of like very trite. You know, like the subject matter is very like, oh my gosh, did I think that was creative? You know, that's kind of funny. But some of my earliest works that were for myself, like just playing around with my camera, are some of my favorite things. I mean, I'm really in love with them. Like, I know that sounds crazy, but I'm like, that's the stuff that was truly who I was at the time. And I feel like that's another part of photography that's so wonderful, is it really is our vision, and it's what we shoot. Is part of who we are, really. I mean, it's like an extension of how we see the world. So I love looking back and seeing like how I saw the world at 20 years old. I think that that's really super fun. And my self-portraits, I took a lot of stuff in reflective surfaces back then. And I love seeing that. I love seeing myself like that, and like what I wore and, you know, how I composed the shot. And there's so much to it. There's so many layers to it. But, yeah, I mean, I guess sometimes I look back at like my professional work and I go, ooh, whoa, look at that. But I do that now. Sometimes I'm like, I'm not as good as I used to be. Or, you know, I have all these like, funny little hangups, or I'm like, that's weird. I mean, I get in certain situations where I'm like, I'm not that great at that, or I should think about that. But I tend to stay away from the things that I don't do very well. I'm like, yeah, don't do that again. You know, I think I'd rather just keep working on the things that I feel like are really, serving me.
Now, did you come from a creative family, or do you have other photographers around you, or?
You know, it's so funny because my dad, when I was really young, he always just had a kind of a camera, and I don't think I ever really thought about it until I noticed how many pictures I had of me when I was a little kid. I mean, I'm the oldest, so I'm the one with all the pictures of me and my mom. I mean, I have a million pictures of me and my mom, which is so rare. But my dad always had a camera. I guess I didn't really think of it at the time. I'm thankful for it now. But so I suppose, yeah, I mean, he loved to sketch. He was a fireman, but so he wasn't like a creative. He wasn't an artist in his career, but he was always creative. My mom, has her own creative flair. I wouldn't say I come from an artistic family or that my dad was a photographer necessarily, but he did shoot a lot. And I was pretty much encouraged. My mom was really encouraging about my artwork. And she, all the way to this day, will ask me if I'm in some kind of funk, like, are you doing anything creative? She used to call it when I was growing up, especially in my angsty, early 20s, late teens, early 20s, my mom would say, are you doing your art? Whenever I would get really angsty and crabby, she'd just say, are you doing your art? Which meant anything from making collages to drawing to anything that she thought was my outlet, she would encourage, always. And so she would always.
That's great. I mean, she must have
Yeah,
thought
right?
art was a way of a way of healing or finding ourselves or something.
Yeah,
have you
like
ever talked to her about that?
Yeah, I was just talking to her the other day, actually. I was saying, I always remember you would say, are you doing your art? And she's like, yeah, I guess I did used to say that. And that also was writing. I journaled since I was 12 years old. And that was because I was in, when my parents got divorced, they got me into therapy with my sisters and I, and my therapist was making us journal. And I thought it was just like the worst thing in the world, but I ended up doing it at the time, because of course you don't want to be told by a grown-up to do something that you have to show your feelings, God forbid. But it was the best thing for me. And I think, the interesting tie about creativity and writing for me was that I wasn't necessarily a creative writer. I was more of a personal writer, a journaler. And then when blogging came, and I was, I've been doing this my whole life. This is fun. Now you can write and not have to be edited and not have to be published, but necessarily, like in the traditional way. But now you can actually write something and hit publish, and the world can see it. And it can be what I want to say. And that's the only thing that matters, is that I want to say it. That was, to me, really exciting. And then to pair it with photography, I was like in heaven. I was like, blogging, like, that is my jam. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest invention ever made, was blogging for me.
So do you still write a personal handwritten journal, or does your stuff mainly show up in blogging and writing?
It mainly shows up in blogging and writing. Almost everything that I write, even when I was writing, for a number of years for Digital Photography Magazine, it was all like personal stories, my experiences, even when I'm tying in the photography piece of it. So in a way, I think all of my writing is in journal form. That's, I feel like, is what I'm most natural at, is the journal type writing.
Uh-huh.
So no, I don't write anymore with my paper. I mean, I write in a little gratitude journal, so I am actually using a pen and paper sometimes, but I'm not writing in a journal. I think the last time I did was like maybe when my second daughter was born. So it's been like, 15 years, I think, since I've actually sat down with a journal.
Now, are your children pursuing any artistic, creative endeavors?
They're in the performing arts.
Ah.
Yeah. So my oldest isn't doing that anymore. Now she's in college and she's focusing on academics, but that's her creative outlet, I think. I mean, her outlet is her academia. That's what really brings her, like, energizes her. And so I feel like that's her space that she likes to be in. It's what makes her feel the best. And what really floats her boat. And then I'm watching my youngest, who's in high school, just a freshman in high school, and she's a dancer. And also loves to sing and do theater arts and stuff. And that's definitely, and she also loves to decorate. And that's the other thing about creativity, and you were saying earlier that some people say things like, I don't know how to draw, or I can't draw. People are like that with creativity in general, right? We hear it all the time. I'm not a creative person, or I don't have a creative bone in my body. And, I just love to challenge that and say, actually, you could be cooking and that's how you're creative. Or you could be decorating and that's how you're creative. There's a million ways. Or gardening. Those are all creative outlets. People just don't, necessarily identify them as such. But I love to say, of course you're creative. Look at what you do in the kitchen. Of course, look at your home. Your home is your canvas. I mean, look at this place. It's like, everything's done, so deliberately and with such intention. And I think that, or the way you dress, there's a lot of other ways that you can be creative. So like I see with my youngest daughter being so in love with decorating and organizing and things, that's totally her outlet. I mean, I see her really, really happy when she's in that space. So those are the things that I see them doing and loving so much that makes me happy. As long as you find something that really energizes you, what makes you come alive. And that's the stuff that you got to focus on and do more of, I think.
Yeah. And I think I really brought up, the subject of your children and stuff because you focused a lot on mothers in photography and working with them in in shooting pictures and documenting lives and things.
I do.
I saw that as a focus. So that was why I brought that up.
Yeah, it really is for me. I mean, being in it, now my oldest is 20 years old. So being in that space of documenting, motherhood for so long, I feel like it's really important. And why not do it in a way that really gets you excited? Like why, not only that, but there's a whole, like you had mentioned before, a whole healing process to being creative. And for me, I had postpartum with my second daughter, and I had 2 years that felt literally like I don't remember it. Really, truly 2 years of a very, very heavy fog. And I look back at my pictures and I'm like, oh my God, I was present. Wait a minute. I might not really remember those days because it was really hard, but I was using my camera. I am absolutely sure, looking back, I was using my camera to survive. I was seeing these incredible moments and these little things in my daughter's life when she was a baby that were clearly keeping me afloat. So I almost celebrate the motherhood part and focus on that in a book in particular because of being able to look back. Like this hindsight thing is really important for me in my work, is being able to look back at, the years and how photography transformed my life's process as a mother. So that's, I think, where the focus kind of came from, is being able to look back. I wasn't in it when I wrote the photography books. I wasn't in the thick of it as far as like having babies. It was afterwards that I could look back and say like, oh, wow, hey, moms, this can actually save you. This can actually be a gift. There's so many multifaceted things that photography can do for you, that I wanted to kind of, encourage people to do it.
Wow, I think that's just very meaningful and very true. And it does emphasize what your mom was saying. Are you doing your art? So I think she saw in you that was your way of helping you deal with problems, which is cool. Very helpful, absolutely. I think, for some people to reflect on that. Yeah. And you have certainly this, Shutter Sisters, the spirit of sisterhood, that you encourage so many women who are interested in photography to get together to form this website. You had retreats. I think that's a real gift.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, it's interesting because there are so many things and directions and places I could have taken that. And what I started to finally feel like with Shutter Sisters was that it was just such a magical, special place and special thing that I felt like it got to a point where people were launching into doing their own things, right? So there were so many amazing things coming from the sisterhood, the community, the inclusion, and allowing people to kind of grow and move on, that it got to a place where I was kind of like, okay, the children have launched, like everyone's gone doing things. That's wonderful. And it was kind of like, it felt just like a natural progression in a way. I didn't ever really feel like it was the end. I still don't feel like it's the end, but I didn't really know how to wrap it up. So I was kind of like, okay, well, everyone's just doing their thing. This is great. Do your thing, everybody. And then I had, things to focus on, other things. And like I said, when other opportunities come up, I mean, you have to pay the bills, right? Other
Yeah.
opportunities come up. I'm, writing books and teaching classes and whatever, wherever that led me. And it was kind of like, it just kind of felt like it was just like the progression of how things move, through. And now I was thinking the other day, a million amazing things have happened since Shutter Sisters. It's not necessarily because of, some things happened because of, a lot of people met at Shutter Sisters, or even at big picture classes in the picture series classes that I took. A lot of people met and a lot of connections were made, and then things were launched. So I just look at it as kind of a lot of things happened since, and they just happened to kind of touch upon maybe the hub that was, Shutter Sisters and in the picture classes. And it's super exciting and wonderful. And I'm actually focusing on that right now as a way of honoring kind of the journey. I mean, I just turned 50. So that's one of those times in your life when you really start to look back. And, I've gone through phases where I felt very, kind of abusive to myself about ways that I failed in different parts of my journey. And it was really bringing me down. So I'm kind of floating to the surface again and remembering, like, I need to honor all the wonderful things. And you know what? Focusing on my failures is not the way to live my life. And it's not healthy. And it's not good for me. And I'm realizing it more and more. I'm just coming to terms with, like, it's time. Like this, you inviting me here was such a gift, because I'm like, wow, I get to talk about these things that I've loved, with someone who has been there with me. You were there, you got to see it, you were in it, you've been in it. So I really appreciate getting the opportunity to do this. These are the gifts I feel like are starting to come as I am in this space of really remembering and honoring, the journey of where I've been.
Yeah, well,
So,
it was a real gift to have something like Shutter Sisters. I mean, I encourage people, if there's any chance for a community get together, it's amazing, because, I mean, there was sort of a structure to the whole event that I attended. But what was kind of cool was all the little things that people took off and made something of and encouraged other people. And, why don't we try and take a picture this way? And everybody try that. And
right. Yeah. I just never really felt like I wanted to be an expert in things like, in a lot of things. I just really wanted everyone to find their own way, and that was a lot of the kind of structure or unstructure of what it was that we did at some of the events were more about, like, letting people have time to go run off into the desert with their tutus. I mean, that thing, like, stuff like that, I couldn't have dreamed of something. I couldn't have created something like that if I tried. So to watch everybody else do that was so thrilling. I was like, oh my gosh, these are incredible people doing incredible things with their own ideas. I don't need to come up with these ideas. Like, clearly everyone has their own.
Providing a space and an opportunity and a few little props to get things going, and things just took off. I mean, there were people we engaged with that that people stumbled upon and pulled into the group.
Right.
From famous songwriters to crazy entertainers.
Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. You can't plan for that stuff. But like you said, it's good to recognize that you got to create a space for it and let that happen. And I feel like that's kind of what Shutter Sisters did. It created a space, which, I'm really thankful for it. And, if that was its job, then that makes me happy,
Right. And I think if people have an opportunity where they can get away and, whether it's just for a few hours or for a weekend, it doesn't have to be to some exotic adventure. It could be something very simple, or even hosting something in your backyard with a couple of friends to get together and explore something. It could be a good way to push creativity and feed off each other.
Oh, absolutely. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, I was doing something literally in a friend's backyard. She and I were working together on some workshops, and we just gathered people together in her home. And it was, I mean, we were leading it, but it was as inspiring for us as it was, for the other people coming, just like-minded women just coming together and, from all walks of life and trying to just do something fun and creative. It was like, just being together, I think, in a community is enough sometimes, you know?
And speaking of community, I think I want to remind people, of course, well, we mentioned Instagram where you can find Shutter Sisters.
Yep.
And your everything that you have is on your website at traceyclark.com.
Uh-huh.
And I think finding the people that are connected in that way, sometimes that can give you a push. Do you have any classes going on right now, Tracey?
I don't have anything that's happening right now, but I'm going to be announcing something before the end of the year that's going to take place next year that has a lot to do with what we've been talking about, actually, a lot of kind of with kind of where I'm at, looking back at some of the things and honoring things, and back a little bit more back to the almost like it used to be with where you read a blog post and then you get prompted and then you kind of get your, get your creativity stirred up, and then you are also invited along to share in that. So I do have that. I'm actually shaping it up now. I know I'm really ready and looking forward to something new. And I feel like it's something new, but at the same time, it also harkens back to some of the things that I have my most fondest memories of. And like I said, being at the milestone right now at 50 and being at an important part of my life. One of my daughters is in college, and, that's a whole new stage, and I'm ready for, whatever's next. And so I'm kind of in that space, and that's the kind of space I want to hold and hope that other people I think other people are going to want to participate. I hope they do. So yeah, that's going to be coming soon. I'll announce it and I'll have it posted on my blog.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to that because I always find all of your classes and your ideas so inspirational. And I've really enjoyed having you with me and talking about this today. And you've already mentioned a lot of your general thoughts about creativity. I don't know if there was any additional thoughts that you wanted to share.
Really, I think we kind of circled through it because I've been thinking so much about it, knowing I was going to be talking to you. And I was really thinking about that, like kind of how important it is to find whatever creative outlet is yours and feels good to you, because it just really does make life so much more enjoyable. I mean, whether it's playing the piano or, like I said before, gardening or anything, I think instead of thinking we're not creative is actually just paying attention to some of the things that we are creative. We are creative just as human beings. We're problem solvers, and that is being creative, solving problems. And so I feel like it just makes life much more rich, the more creative we are in the way that makes us feel most alive.
And then recognizing that creativity, that we are, it's a way of finding that thing to do, because that will bring us comfort and solace and maybe get us through difficult times.
Agreed.
It's recognizing that. Well, this has just been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Oh my gosh, I really needed it. Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining me today. Really, it's so good to get back in touch, Tracey.
Thank you.
Lovely.
So much.
Well, you take care. Thanks again, and I'm looking forward to what's next on your blog.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us at A Creative Approach podcast today. Show notes from today's episode, where you can learn more about my guest, Tracey Clark, are available on the webpage www.acreativeapproachpodcast.com. A Creative Approach podcast has a Facebook page and a Facebook group page as well. Please join the group page for questions and feedback on the show. A Creative Approach podcast website is where you can find our affiliate links. The website also has a tab for a Patreon page with periodic stories from me and a place where you may choose to contribute to the show. Thanks so much to my Patreon donors. You'll find A Creative Approach podcast on many platforms like Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Do subscribe to your favorite. These platforms, like Apple Podcasts, are another place you can post reviews and feedback. Thanks again for listening. I hope you will join in future conversations and find inspiration as you explore your creative approach to life.